Dr. Quinlan is a refugee from this rotten program. He knows from first-hand experience what the patients receive. He'll tell you a little about that now. Don?
Thank you, Dr. Dorrity. A little earlier, Dr. Dorrity had referred to Murphy's first law. Those of us who have encountered a lot of government interference, and I'm sure you may have, may well be familiar with Murphy's first law, and for those of you who have not heard of it, I will just define it briefly. It simply states that if anything can get goofed up, it will. If the microphone goes off, you'll know this is not a communist plot, this is Murphy's first law. For the rest of you who do not have this problem, I just want to bring out a few little points because you may have problems you don't even know about. As Dr. Dorrity had pointed out, in one way I'm a refugee. I happen to, quote, enjoy, unquote, the benefits of government medicine from a period of 1948 up to 1958. There are, I think, certain lessons for this country that everything that is imported is not better than what is homegrown. Those members of this audience do not need to be reminded of that fact. One of the things which is certainly not better is socialized medicine. In order to understand a little bit better the background of this, perhaps we should spend a few moments on a few things that are not talked about very much nowadays. I'm talking about the physician-patient relationship. This is mentioned occasionally in the media nowadays, but it is dismissed as being something old-fashioned and unimportant in this scientific world that we live in. Confidence, trust, confidentiality, what has been referred to as satisfaction. That's a difficult word to define when you come down to the relationship, which is a very personal one between a physician and a patient. People sometimes say the physician and his patient. I don't think that is the way we look upon it. We look upon it the patient and his or her physician, because really the patient is the boss, and that is the way it should be. A patient engages a physician because he has trust and confidence that this is an honest man who is qualified to do what he says he's going to do. He knows that he cannot do the impossible. He doesn't promise the impossible, but he will do his best, and he will do it for that particular patient. Confidentiality is something that you only read about in the media nowadays if it involves the confidentiality of sources of reporters' news items. Then it gets banner headlines. This is very important. But some of you may not be too aware that there is an assault upon your own right to confidentiality when it comes to your patient-physician relationships. What the situation always has been and still is, even in the law, is that any information I as a physician have about my patient is not my property. It is the property of the patient. I do not have the right to divulge this to anyone without the patient's consent, and that is the way it should be, and that is the way it is. The record upon which I keep this information is my property, but I may not dispose of this information without the patient's consent. Now, government is not handicapped in this way. It can bring out rules and regulations, and in fact it has, last October, in the dying moments of the 92nd Congress, passed a law which is Public Law 92603, which includes a thing called Professional Standards Review Organization, which you have seen nothing about in the media, I'll guarantee. This is a typical example of the assault upon the confidentiality which is the right of patients. Your confidential medical information may now, once this law is implemented, if it is, be on a computer in Washington. It is for this reason that just last week, our association, through our attorneys in Chicago, filed suit against the federal government on the unconstitutionality of this law. Mr. Woolley, as an attorney, will discuss this much more fully. I want to go back to this relationship between the physician and the patient. Where these government great plans break down is that they ignore truths which are evident to anybody who thinks about them. The first thing is the uniqueness of the individual. You are unique. So are you. So am I, believe it or not. There is nobody on this earth who is exactly like you. There never has been, there never will be. You are not a machine like a car. You do not behave predictably 100% of the time. When you are affected by illness, this illness will not behave exactly the same way in you as it does in this person or in that person. You cannot lay down norms of care and treatment that will apply to everybody, because everybody is an exception to the rule. Physicians do not treat diseases. Physicians treat people who have diseases, and there is a very distinct difference. This is why when you have third parties, such as government, interfering between the patient-physician relationship, you have dissatisfaction, lack of satisfaction, if you prefer. And this is both on the part of the patient, who is the most important person, and it is also on the part of the physician. Third parties, government isn't the only one who will interfere in this way. Certain insurance companies have done this, are doing it. Certain trade unions are doing it. Certain employers even are doing it. But the British experience that I have had certainly has taught me that this is not what the American public would want. The American public, if they knew what they are getting, what is planned for them, wouldn't buy it for 1 minute. The problem is that the media do not always give the unadorned truth. And medical care is no exception to this statement. As a matter of fact, you may find a little bit of confusion in the way things are worded sometimes in the media. Medical care, health care, as if they're synonymous. Just think about that. Medical care, strictly speaking, is the care given to a patient by a physician. Health care encompasses an awful lot more than just that. Whether you drink too much, whether you eat too much, whether you smoke too much, whether you have a job, whether you have a grandmother who is at home ill, whom your wife has to take care of. Your health depends upon an awful lot more things than just the care of a physician. The physician cannot cure your economic ills. This is not his job. There is a certain amount of literature, however, that if you're interested, you can read on this subject. You will not find it usually in the daily press because for some reason they do not appear to be too interested in this. I would recommend to you that you listen to the people who are experienced in this. I would recommend, for example, that you listen to the words of a former Minister for Health in Britain the Right Honorable J. Enoch Powell, who spent over 3 years as Minister for Health from 1960 to 63. He brings out a few little things. With regard to this term I use, satisfaction, this is actually his term. Just listen to what he said just a couple of years ago when he was over here. After all, the patient has been given by Act of Parliament an unlimited claim upon medical care, something which, of course, is impossible in the real world under any system. And on the other hand, the doctor has been given an unlimited duty, similarly by statute, something which is equally impossible in the real world. And so two people ready to serve and be served by one another are obliged to do so within a framework which enjoins and indeed promises the impossible. And if under that system general medical practice has survived in Britain, then that is much more a tribute to the inherent happiness and personalities of those concerned than in any way due to the system. I used the word satisfaction earlier. I think this is a very important word. There is no ultimate objectivity about medical care, and a great deal of the satisfaction of medical care, of the receipt of medical care, is subjective and is bound to be subjective. In medicine, as in the rest of our life, satisfaction is in getting what we think we want, or at any rate what we think we want more than any of the alternative things which we imagine we could have gotten. And to interpolate the word think does not alter the truth of the statement, for it is difficult to distinguish between what we think we want and what we want, except in a dictatorship which tells us what we want. And we're not yet living in that state, I have to report, in the United Kingdom. It is my opinion, based upon comparisons with other countries, which have had a similar or greater increase in affluence compared with Britain in recent years, that the public in Britain would voluntarily have chosen, through the dispersed system which I described earlier, not only a different pattern of total medical care, but probably a larger volume of medical care, and so on. He goes on in a book called A New Look at Medicine and Politics to say this: common thought and parlance tend to conceal or deny the fact that demand for all practical purposes is unlimited in a national health service. The vulgar assumption is that there is a definable amount of medical care, quote, needed, unquote, and that if that need was met, no more would be demanded. This is absurd. And ladies and gentlemen, I can assure you of the validity of that statement. If you had one physician to one patient under these conditions, you still would have a, quote, doctor shortage. You may or may not be familiar with the way planners put things down in nice terms, idealism, if you like. Let me read for you here a short extract from the preamble to the Constitution of World Health Organization, July the 22nd, 1946. Remember, the United States was one of the countries that signed this. Here's a definition of health I want you to think about. Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Now listen, complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Have you experienced that for more than a few minutes in the past 24 hours? Now, having so defined it, it goes on to say, the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the fundamental rights of every human being, without distinction of race, religion, political belief, economic, or social condition. I put it to you, this is idealism carried to absurdity. They promise the impossible. The public does not get what was promised. The public is frustrated. Who gets the blame? The politician who has promised the impossible? No, the physician, who cannot deliver what he couldn't be expected to deliver. This is the trick that we've been sucked into, and that unfortunately occurs right, left, and center. There is a book which was written by Harry Schwartz, who is one of the editorial board members of the New York Times, hardly the most conservative newspaper. But this is a good book. It's called The Case for American Medicine, a realistic look at our healthcare system. I'll just read one little paragraph from it for you towards the end here. Britain and Sweden, in short, have not created medical utopias by socializing their medical care systems. Both societies carry heavy tax burdens for the, quote, free, unquote, care they dispense. In both societies, the queues of persons waiting for hospital admission are long, far longer than Americans would find acceptable. In both countries, those who can do so prefer to go to private practitioners for the personal care that does not flourish in an impersonal, socialized system. Many Americans, though obviously not all, get better, more convenient, and more personalized care than is available to the great majority of Britons and Swedes. And those Americans would find either the British or the Swedish system represented a deterioration in the quality of their medical care. Many of those Americans, one may suspect, would not be consoled by the knowledge that they were paying for medical care through heavier taxes rather than through direct payment to the physician they chose. The idea, which tends to get abroad in the media, is that if the government steps in, it will ensure a higher quality of medical care at a lower cost. The government is going to do what you can't do more efficiently and at lower cost. One example of this lower cost, there are many examples, but one which amused me, which I read just a couple of days ago, was about a health maintenance organization, I guess you could call it pilot study, which is going to be carried out in Ohio in association with the RAND Corporation. $9 million has been appropriated for this study, and they're going to make sure it shows that it works. But of this $9 million appropriated, $7 million are for administrative costs. Even to me, this is unbelievable. $7 million for administrative costs. So the government will do things more efficiently than you will. It will do them at less cost. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you don't believe that, and we certainly don't. The personal care which you get through your private physician whom you choose should be guarded, not because of the physician, but because of you. You deserve personal care. There is no other care that's worth having. An impersonal care is bound to lead to dissatisfaction. It is more expensive. It does not improve, despite all the platitudes that are put out by people who advocate this type of care, it does not improve the overall health care of a nation. It drags everything down to the lowest common denominator. And things which are free, quote free, unquote, at the point of consumption, in the words of Enoch Powell, the demand for those things becomes insatiable. Therefore, rationing is necessary in order to ensure that you have the supply to go around. Nothing is unlimited in this life. Physicians are not unlimited. Even patients are not unlimited. You cannot dispense an insatiable amount of medical care. It isn't necessary, it's wasteful, and it's expensive. I hope that the action of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons will be one step in the right direction in slowing this onslaught of the government upon your rights. The courts will decide on this particular issue, and I'll leave the rest of that discussion to Mr. Woolley when he comes to speak about it. I would say just this in closing. In the United States, the free enterprise system is the thing which has made this country great. That includes medical care, which up until government started interfering with it, had been the highest on this globe. We have seen some deterioration of this in recent years when the government started deciding when it was going to license various drugs, usually about 10 years after they had been in use in other parts of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, the government in its wisdom is not always wise, as you are well aware. I think if we can get the government rolled back in medicine, you will be the better off. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Quinlan.